Welcome to SHOWstudio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from all parts of the industry discuss and debate the most important Fashion Week shows of the season. Today, at the end of the Milan Fashion Week, we're going to be discussing Bottega Veneta. I'm Joshua James Small, and I'll let my panel introduce themselves.
I'm Doug Broad. I'm a stylist working for Wonderland and Man About Town and Rollercoaster magazines.
I'm Shanu Walpita. I'm a trend forecaster. I've got a company called FutureWise, and I look at strategy and stuff like that.
I'm Jameela Elfaki, and I'm a photographer and the editor of Azima magazine.
Fantastic. Right. So, I assume you all saw the show. Fab. What do we think? First thoughts?
Love. I'm a huge Bottega fan, so it was amazing seeing him stay so true to sort of brand identity, but also with huge amounts of colour and really strong colours that we've not seen before. Really loved it.
I kind of felt mixed emotions. I wasn't really sure if it was the most exciting from him, but yeah, I'm not sure. I did there were points that I really liked, but also things that I was this is a bit safe. I'm not sure.
I felt the same way. I enjoyed a lot of the narrative of it, but also I felt it became quite, not obvious, but I kind of felt I'd seen it already and I wanted something kind of new to come in. But I did really enjoy the silhouettes, the slimline, the crop, the color pops. Those things really stood out to me, and the textures as well.
Did we all like Bottega before Daniel Lee? That's a real good question.
It was nice.
Did any of you actually look at? Did you, because you stylist, did you borrow anything?
Yeah.
Because this would have been a year or so ago, right?
Bottega was one of those things before Daniel Lee that it was just a safe option to have.
Okay.
Whereas now that it's Daniel Lee, it's very much you want it. Everyone wants it.
Do you want it just because of the name, or do you want it because of the actual pieces?
Because of the actual pieces.
Okay. Where do you think it stands in comparison to previous Bottega? Seeing as you're not all fans of it previously, do you think it is? I guess you're biased in saying that it's better, but
I think you can just see from the amount of awards that he got at the London Fashion. It's just.
I was going to say about that. Do you all think it's valid? I found it really interesting because I didn't realise until researching that he is one of the most celebrated designers within one night. No one
he got
Galliano,
4.
All of these people have never won 4 in one night.
Yeah, it's
and
amazing.
you won 4 awards in one night. So I was is there a valid reason for that? Do you think? Because he was so new to the company, and personally, I said off air, I don't know of anyone that really talks about Bottega. I talk about lots of different brands with lots of different people. Bottega is just a brand that's there. It's not necessarily a brand that I discuss. So I was really baffled, I guess, to see that he'd won so many awards. Because I was aware he won a few, but I wasn't aware that he was one of the most celebrated in one evening. So do you think that's valid, or?
I think it's a timing thing. He came in at the right time when the industry was looking for something that he captured the spirit of the moment, I think, and that's why he's so celebrated because, for me it's a timing thing.
I think it was such a strong debut as well. It was it took everybody by surprise, I think. And from the accessories point as well, it was such a strong contribution. So I definitely think that's valid for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had forgotten about Bottega or were disregarding it, and he really brought it back into the limelight.
Bottega weren't making a massive money before, and obviously if we go back to the 90s, they were almost bankrupt, so it's not necessarily a company that's been stable throughout. So do you think that this level of, exposure and the amount of products they're putting out, do you think that will sustain? Do you think people will still continue to purchase into this brand? Because also, I mentioned and discussed off air, that these are pieces that are of a really high value. So the idea is for them to withstand the test of time. So I wouldn't imagine that people are going to be buying large amounts of these pieces every season. They're buying perhaps one bag that they want to last a lifetime, or that would be the idea. That's the idea of a luxe piece. So do you think that financially they can sustain, considering that they almost went bankrupt in the 90s, and obviously weren't doing incredibly well prior to Daniel Lee. So
I think they could, like, if we look at the accessories, he's got the it bag, the it shoe that everyone wants. And whilst they're all sort of imitations of one another season to season, it definitely does feel, each one feels new and it feels different, and it still feels exciting.
Yeah. Definitely like reinvents it in different ways, but like still brings the same kind of feel through, if that makes sense.
It's like modern classics. Like, they're things that you will buy for longevity, but they also feel really current.
Yeah.
And I think like he updates it with subtle details that make them still, like, you still want them every time. Pretty much.
Would you go to Bottega then for a classic, or would you go elsewhere? Do any of you own Bottega?
No.
So you would want to own Bottega, or would you go somewhere else? Because there are a lot of brands that do. There are a lot of brands just in general in the world. So, would you, if you wanted a classic staple that was well made, do you think you would go to Bottega, or would you go elsewhere?
I'd go to Bottega.
Yeah.
Because like
They're doing things that no one else is doing. Like that woven leather is really, really interesting. And then it carrying through, you know, last season there was the woven knits in men's and women's, which was so beautiful. I think they're very iconic pieces that...
I mean, that is the woven is their staple.
Yeah.
Just how long that can... Like, I feel like I'm being very anti it, but I'm just playing devil's advocate because you're very positive. But just obviously, because I understand that obviously that is their staple, that's their namesake sort of textile, essentially. That's what they make their money off of. But obviously, as we go season after season, that will only last so many years before we've seen a woven cross like bag.
Yeah, but think about like the popularity of Gucci, which I said backstage. It's like continuously popular, and it's the same vibe over and over again. People still buy into it. So I think like there is something to say about like a brand having a narrative that you can identify with that still feels current and new and has longevity to it. So I don't know. I think there's something interesting.
I was reading
in
an
that.
interesting piece about Gucci, so I'll be interested to see what you all think. But like, in the obviously because they're under both under Kering. As far as I'm right in saying, Bottega and Gucci. But Gucci is a brand and an aesthetic that everyone can buy into. It's an aesthetic that can be translated into cheaper items, for good or for worse. It's an aesthetic that can be bought into by people from a low income to a high income. So that's why you've got, I suppose, this whole sphere of Gucci that has happened over the last few years, whereas to translate a simple piece or a simple well-made piece such as these pieces in the collections from Bottega, it actually is a really hard thing to do, from what I've read and from people I've talked to translate a simple, well-made, I suppose, jacket into something that is saleable in Marks & Spencer's or a H&M or a high street store is actually really difficult, because you then have to work out where you are losing like skill, because obviously these pieces are quite simple to make. They just take a long time because they're made really well, and that's why they cost so much at Bottega. But then when you make the same simple silhouette in a much cheaper fabric, it then can look just cheap in general. It's not really accessible. It also won't necessarily translate as well on your average person. So when someone buys it from a high street store, the same silhouette, it's not necessarily cut the same way, it's not necessarily made in exactly the right fabrics, and those are the things that make a Bottega piece so expensive, so luxe, essentially. That's why you get that aesthetic, but when it's translated across, it doesn't necessarily translate as well, if you see what I mean. So I'm like, is that aesthetic accessible? Because obviously, like you said, Gucci does so well, but Gucci does so well because it's an accessible aesthetic all round, whereas this is not necessarily an aesthetic which can be accessed from all points just because of how it's made. Do you think that would...
Elements of it, definitely, like the splits in the trousers
Yeah.
can be translated quite nicely.
I like
Some of the tailoring.
jackets.
Yeah. Obviously the accessories, we'll probably see tons and tons. We've already seen them at like some of the stores, but they're square-shaped. Boots will be all over the high street. Like,
There's already the woven bags everywhere
exactly.
as well, yeah.
I mean, I think elements can be taken. Obviously, it won't be as beautifully made as a real Bottega.
Yeah.
That's impossible, but
Yeah, I definitely think there are points that will be taken to high street for sure.
even the color.
Yeah.
I'm sure color is like the easiest thing to translate and like take into like a commercial space.
Yeah, it was just because I was talking to a couple of people and they were saying, because obviously if you translate a simple jacket across, it's obviously going to be made cheaper and it's going to not necessarily have the same fit, because it's going to be made much faster on mass. So what would have been a nice, simple, straight down jacket might look a bit askew on like your average person because they're paying 40 quid for it in like H&M, as opposed to £2,000 for the leather alternative from Bottega. So then what was that nice, clean aesthetic necessarily just looks a bit messy.
I think that's just, you know, a message for fast fashion in general, where it's people are buying into things that are coming down from the runway, but it's never going to be that. And obviously it's, you know, it's really difficult because on mass, like, fast fashion as a whole isn't sustainable.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not a fan of
But at the same time, I think there's sort of an element of classism in terms of like fashion where it's like you see all these runways and it's just the majority of us aren't ever going to be able to own these pieces. It's not for the masses, it's for the select few. And so it's sort of tricky talking about fast fashion in terms of it's always going to emulate what we're seeing on the runway, but it's never going to give us exactly that because it can't.
I think the message it does tell us is that there is something around like longevity and creating pieces that have like something that can surpass one season necessarily, if you know what I mean. Like it feels very trans-seasonal, everything that they've done. Even though this is autumn winter, you can wear some of these pieces in the summer as well.
I agree.
So I think there's a message in that, and also some of the pieces feel very practical. So I think that's a new trend, that we're moving away from things that can be thrown away. They're things that we can wear whatever the weather is, whatever the climate is, and also with the way the earth is, you know, climate crisis and stuff like that. We need to start thinking about the practical side of fashion.
Yeah, because we discussed this off air. Also, I was wondering whether you think there is any validity. Obviously, the clothing is quite nice in this collection, but is there any validity in them actually producing a collection of clothing when most of their sales come from accessories and leather goods? Because obviously that's what the brand started as. That's what they are known for. So, is there any validity in a full collection, or do you think that it would be better in a world where we are very conscious of output and overconsumption? Do you think it would be better if they became perhaps more of a collaborations brand, where they created solely accessories and footwear but worked with other brands in terms of, because obviously there are a number of brands that are now starting to do that, and that's a new way of working, and obviously both separate brands in terms of the collaboration get the credit for their product, and it's cheaper for show, it's more sustainable in terms of output. So do you think that would be a better move? Because obviously this collection isn't necessarily, in my opinion, that different to perhaps a Stella or a Celine or from previous, and it's like, do we need more of the same when it perhaps makes more sense? Because even you said that the main pieces are the woven bags, which obviously they do look amazing. I like the woven bags, and I think they have a very valid place in the industry, but I think maybe it might work better if they were to be paired with a collection elsewhere.
I think it would be such a waste if for Daniel Lee to be used as just a collaboration designer, because I think he's phenomenal. And obviously we can really see his roots from Celine coming through in his collections. And I think this collection would be more standout had we not seen all this fringing detail already on everywhere. You know, Jill Sander, Prada, everyone's done it. I think it's done really beautifully, and it is very strong. And those colours, you know, what we're seeing there with the fluo and the black, it is classic, and I see what you mean, that we're seeing it before, and it's not necessarily groundbreaking, but I think we've almost reached a stalemate these days where it's like, what can we create anything that is so brand new? Or can we sort of emulate the past in a way that is current and contemporary and beautiful? And that's why I really respect him and love his design, and I think
I don't dispute it, because Daniel Lee he's not an accessories designer, and that's what they hired him as. They hired him as a designer that could create collections, but in terms of the brand itself, to separate the two entities, I just didn't know whether perhaps Bottega as a brand would sit better in the world in terms of output.
I think it would be a shame if it were to be a collaboration, because you kind of lose the heritage of it, and you know, like, I think it's important to keep it.
I like what you were saying backstage about possibly just having drops rather than actual seasons? Because it does feel seasonless to me to a
Yeah, because we
degree.
discussed this off air, because I was thinking about, basically, if you look at their website and you look at how they discuss their brand, they make it seem as this really, it is a high-end brand, it is a luxe brand, and they have a place in Milan, if I'm right, where they educate people on how to manufacture the leather goods, so it's very much an institution, and I just thought that doesn't really fit with the model of dissemination in terms of how much they're putting out, because they do pre-collections, they do drops, they do capsule collections with different brands, and it seems like a lot of clothing for somewhere that's trying to seem very, it seems mixed messages, so I wasn't sure whether maybe it would be better if they just did drops and they did perhaps one seasonless collection or 2 collections a year and forgot about the pre-collections and forgot about capsule. Do you guys like pre-collections? Do you like capsule collections? Do you use them necessarily?
I mean, I use them as, depending on what time of year it is an issue. Like I do use pre-fall and other collections. And I understand where you're coming from, that it is such a fast turnaround, but we see every big brand doing it. You know, Kim Jones at Dior is pulling out collections left, right and centre.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that sustainably, I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's the best for the planet right now, but at the same time, it's really nice to have sort of a constant flow, and I'm sort of counteracting myself.
All of this, because I mean, accessories itself, they could, as we see on the screen now, they could be dropped, and then you could have 1 seasonless collection or 2 seasonless collections a year and keep it very simple. But I don't know, it just seems also the way they're working their brand at the moment, in terms of even looking at who they put front row, it wasn't celebrities, it wasn't influencers, and those sort of people are normally the people that are buying into trends. So it just, if they're wanting to make it this exclusive, very limited brand, it might, perhaps, I didn't know whether you thought it might be better if they shifted to a more limited run of clothing that they release every year, because then that would make it more exclusive, because you already have wait lists for the bags, which are never ending, and that's because they don't produce them en masse, and they don't produce, but the amount of collections they put out kind of counterbalances that attitude. It might still be limited runs of the clothing, but it's still a lot of collections. So do you think that it would work, like the model works at the moment? And in general, do you think that the industry, the way that we work with pre and capsule collections and works, or do you think that's an outdated model now?
I think it's outdated. I think, you know, the industry will always preach sustainability, but at the end of the day, it's not.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know, anyone can say everything they want, but, you know, we are a huge contributor to sort of climate change and everything, because there's so much waste and so much mass production and everything. I think brands are just doing anything they can to keep up, and if that means that they're going to make 7 collections a year, unfortunately, I don't really agree with it, but that's just what they're going to do, because people constantly want to be showing stuff. You don't want to sort of fall out of the limelight and be forgotten about because you're only doing 2 collections a year.
Yeah, I just didn't know, because I mean, going back to what you were saying about, I say in every talk I give, I start it by saying that as soon as you put a product out into the world, you are automatically not sustainable in a sense, because you're putting something into the world that we don't actually need. And I say that time and time again because we get very confused about this, but then sustainability in fashion is essentially balancing your craft with your output, so that you're able to continue making what you do with I suppose in a responsible way, but I don't know. I just don't know whether do you think that like the industry could shift, because we were talking about drops, they make more sense. So look at Fenty, they do limited runs. They're able to consistently be putting out pieces, but they're not putting them out en masse. They're putting them out in limited runs. So they'll put like a small collection. So if you collated together all of the drops from Fenty, you would probably have 1 or 2 really good seasonless collections a year. But because it's dropped in certain amounts, so like they'll do a denim range with a few glasses and they'll drop that 1 month, and then 3 months later they might drop a few more bits, and vice versa. And that's, I suppose, more because also they're able to keep a track of their supply chains. So do you think that works better?
I think that works for Fenty because Rihanna is a powerhouse.
Yeah.
And so whatever she does, people are going to snap it up. Daniel Lee coming to Bottega outside of, you know, like a very small group of people, we didn't really know who he was. And the general public didn't really know who he was. and probably still don't. And so he doesn't have that power, you know. I agree that, you know, big brands should really be setting an example and saying this is how we're going to do it because we've got that standing, we are able to.
Yeah, I don't think it would work for this.
Really?
Well, it wouldn't as well, I don't think.
I think it would work, but I just don't think they'd have the notoriety,
Yeah.
notability.
But they've already got the hype.
Yeah, I was going to say that because their campaign with the, I can't remember who shot it with the car. You know, that was absolutely everywhere last year. I mean, it was very simple, but I mean...
they could potentially do both, I guess, but that would be a lot.
We're seeing some like change in the way the retail system is. Like we've got rental, resale, like all these new kind of conversations happening. I wonder if that would affect the seasons and like the way that brands create and consume and stuff like that. Just questions.
Yeah, no, I just think it's quite interesting because as the world shifts, there are a lot of brands that are testing out that model because we said backstage that obviously Burberry did a lot of successful drops where they made about 50 arm cuffs and they sold them out, and that meant there was no waste essentially because they were cut digitally, which meant that obviously they were there was less waste in terms of how it was manufactured, and then obviously all of them sold through. So the idea is that those pieces would go to people who would then use them and they wouldn't be wasted. There's no surplus stock essentially. And I don't know, in my mind, personally, I think that would work for this brand because obviously the leather goods and the shoes, they're already on wait lists that people are happy to wait for, and the clothing itself, if they limited it, it would make it more exclusive and would fit more with this model of this more luxe brand because then there would be wait lists for clothing as well. Don't know. What do we, like the whole silhouettes, specifically the collection, are we able to get the collection up, the full collection? We'll go through a couple of the looks. Did we have any favourites? Did we like anything more than others? Did we think anything worked?
Really like, there's two looks right at the end, like a men's and a women's, almost trench inspired. Is it? Yeah, so this one just here with the fluo shoes, being brought along from sort of shapes that we've seen in previous seasons, but adding in different elements I think is really beautiful. And we've sort of got the cape detailing that was also coming in previous looks on the sleeves. I think this is a really strong one that I love.
Do you think the menswear or the womenswear was more strong? Was strong?
The women's is always stronger for Bottega. I think.
With this collection?
I quite like the men's.
I was going to say that I thought I was quite surprised by the men's. The cropped.
The cropped.
The cropped jackets and the silhouette you had with the high waist pants looked really.
I love the men's.
I think I prefer the women's wear looks for this.
I just think he's got more. He's putting more emphasis on the women's because the women's is the bigger market.
Yeah, because you're predominantly menswear. So would you borrow the women's wear or the menswear piece? Because obviously it's genderless. At the end of the day, clothing is genderless. So what would you be more likely to?
I mean, I borrow all of it. Like I say, it's one of my favourite brands at the moment. I think it's beautiful and it shoots really nicely. It's timeless and you can fit it to any sort of mood or brief. But I think it's clear to see that whilst the menswear is gorgeous and it is really good, he is focusing on the women's wear. Like he came from Celine ready to wear. So,
you can see bits of that coming through.
Oh yeah, definitely. I like the kind of slim, long line silhouettes as well because in the past he had a little bit more oversized proportions. I think this feels a bit fresher. I wrote down in my notes, apocalyptic renaissance because I kind of felt like it did feel kind of futuristic but also retro at the same time. I think there's a nice interplay, like I think that's very current, like a lot of newness comes from the fact that he's referencing like the 70s, the 80s, the past and the future all at once. Yeah. That's kind of why Bottega feels so interesting at the moment, for me anyway, personally. Yeah,
because I was going to say, I was quite surprised by this collection because I thought the last one was a bit clunky.
Yeah.
They were enormous.
Yeah.
Especially the men.
Yeah, I mean, I see where it fits in the world, but I was quite surprised because I'm not necessarily a fan of a clunky silhouette, like a big, large, oversized. So this is quite nice. It's much more streamlined, which is why I think it looks a bit more Celine. Not entirely Celine, but I mean, especially when you get to the tailored coats at the end.
Yeah, no, definitely.
There's the silhouette on them, like some of those, especially the camel stuff. It is very. But I find it quite interesting because I find that the cropped, the menswear looks look very Celine now.
Yes, I was thinking
Do you not think?
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting. For some reason, though, that jacket does not look perfect. That pocket on there looks a bit wonky. If I'm going to pick away at it. But no, so are there any other looks, like, did you guys like anything? Was there anything specific you wanted to point out?
Kind of
Do you think it works better as separates as well? Because I wrote this down in my notes. I wasn't sure, but I think it might, the collection is heavily, even though they are quite simple, heavily overstyled. There's a lot going on. Personally, I think it would look
Quite loved that bag.
better as a separate.
The one with the fringing.
Fringy one.
Yeah.
I like that look, actually.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one. And I liked Kaya's look as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was a strong one. I like the details on the sleeve.
But those, I don't know what they are, those like fur things. I honestly think they're the ugliest thing in the world.
Yeah.
So
Those bags
do we
are
like
not-
them? Or not? 'Cause I just, like I said, I put something out on Instagram, and very little, nobody really talks about Bottega. But those, yeah, I really don't
It's that
understand.
jacket as well, you know.
No, I don't like that
It
one.
is strange.
I don't love
It's almost
the
like you've
jacket.
taken
panel.
two shearling
I
jackets
preferred it
from
on
the
the
high
bag.
street and just put them together and added some plaiting fringing on the bottom. Like, I'm a big fan, but I can't get behind that.
Yeah, that one looks clunky. Like even the movement in it looks really clunky. Whereas that dress that we looked at earlier, which was much more flowy, looks way nicer. No.
No, I don't like the colour palette for that either.
Do you necessarily think that the brand has a place in the world today? I mean, that's a very overarching question, but just because it kind of goes back to what I've mentioned previously, but like when they started making clothing, it was obviously an accessories brand, and then it was early 2000s when they started making the clothing. I read this interview with Susie Menks with Thomas Mayer it was actually in 2011. He was talking about how they started, and it was simply to make product because they had leather bags, they had leather shoes, but in order to create a bout, they didn't have a trouser, so they just created a trouser so that they could have a bout. So there wasn't necessarily any intent in terms of the design. There wasn't any creative intent. It was just that they made product to make more product, and then they expanded that and so forth. So they would make like tops, so they could make jackets made of leather. Do you know what I mean? So it was essentially just product so they could expand their leather goods, which suggests that their brand has no identity. Do you know what I mean? No identity at its core. So do you think that because this is so, obviously Daniel Lee has a very strong sense of design, working at Celine, but so he's able to put together a very concise, very well thought through collection. But I personally don't think there's much of a identity to the archive pieces. So where does he pull from? What brand identity do you see it having? Do you think it has a place?
I feel like the identity is with the craft work, so with the bags, because that's how he's drawing on the heritage of the brand. But I definitely think there is a place for it because he's reinvented it, and like you said, it's got that how do you even say apocalyptic feel to it. But also like there's like touches of elegance, so we feel like he's mixing two worlds together. So I think there's definitely a place for that, for sure.
Well, same with Jonathan Anderson at Loewe.
Yeah.
Where is what was the Loewe identity apart from leather goods?
Yeah.
And they're sort of following the same thing where there's a very minute thing that is the brand's heritage and it's their DNA, and it's extrapolating from that to create full collections season after season. You know, like you're saying, we make this so that we can make this.
Yeah.
You can see that in Bottega, and it very much felt like that before Daniel Lee, whereas now it's almost, it feels as though we're seeing what is the brand identity fully, whereas before it was just we're making stuff because we're making stuff. And we're going to carry on doing that until...
Yeah.
Like even if you look at the archive collections, like if you look at them in a row, they do feel a little bit disjointed, even though Thomas Mayer does have
It's product for the sake of product.
Exactly. Whereas this, if you, again, like we were saying, is that good or bad? But if you look at it across like the last 4 seasons, you can see it's cohesive, that there is like a growth also within the way that he designs for the brand. So I think, but then again, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Like, is it becoming boring? Or,
I guess he's just taking it in a new direction, but it's actually given it like a direction.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It's funny that you said Loewe though, because I'm such a stan for J.W. Anderson. So how do you think this brand, because I didn't make the comparison immediately, it wasn't until someone told me and made the comparison, because obviously the leather goods are similar to you just did. And then when you start to look at this collection, there are slight similarities in terms of the chain work that you see. It was obviously much more elaborate in Loewe. But how do you think this stands in comparison? Because I would, now looking at the two collections, put them as direct competitors, because they are both working with leather goods, and in terms of how they're manufacturing the pieces, they are both of those simple, staple, well-made pieces. So how would you rather pull from? Because I would rather pull from a Loewe than Bottega. But what would you like? Do you like? I mean, you're already Bottega fan, so.
I mean, I love Loewe as well. It's gorgeous.
I think the impetus is similar. Like they're both young designers. They're both taking on these brands that have that accessories heritage. I think this is more commercial than Loewe, if you know what I mean. Like, if I was to translate something into the high street, this would be easier than Loewe.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. But I think, I don't know, I haven't got a preference or anything. I think they're both amazing.
Yeah, I can see the similarities, and that's, why I brought it up, because of their heritages. But I don't, and obviously because of that, they can be seen as direct competitors, but I don't think they're competitors in a way where they're so similar. I think they're challenging one another.
Yes.
And they're doing really well separately, but it's not as though I see a Bottega collection, I think, oh, didn't we see that in Loewe 2 seasons ago, or vice versa.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because it was just 'cause obviously the price range is obviously the same, and it's just like with these sort of pieces, if you are going to be buying these pieces, you're only going to be buying one of them. And Loewe is obviously established an aesthetic in today's culture, where if you're looking for a good well-made leather piece, and also in terms of accessories, Jonathan has won Accessories Designer of the Year, I think 2 or 3 times now. So if you're looking for a well-made leather bag, you're probably more likely to go to Loewe than you are to go to Bottega. So do you think that stands as a problem, or do you think that?
But do you think that comes from Loewe and Jonathan having notability, or do you think that comes from people actually looking at it and saying, "This is what I like"? Like, are you buying into a trend, or are you buying into the fact that it's actually really a gorgeous piece that you want to have? And I think that's why Daniel Lee's done really well, because those woven bags, no one had seen that, and everyone wanted it.
Yeah.
And obviously he got on the hype, and everyone was down for it, but it came out of nowhere. It wasn't like, people were buying J.W. Anderson because it's J.W. Anderson.
Yeah.
It was, Bottega was nothing, really, I think it's safe to say. Or very, let's not say nothing, sorry, I just said that, but not nothing, but it wasn't on anyone's radar.
Yeah. Nobody, like I said, nobody talks about it.
No one mentioned it, and now, he rakes in 4 awards in one evening.
Yeah.
He's got like an estimate of 9.9% growth the next year. It's gone up 2.2%.
Well, in fact, even the bags, I found it really interesting, but because most brands would, especially when they're starting out or rebranding, they would send out samples to everyone under the sun so it can get seen. But apparently Bottega don't actually send out samples to anyone. They only send out a very limited amount of samples to editors to say thank you. But other than that, none of all of the celebrities that you see using the Bottega bags or wearing the Bottega shoes are simply because they've bought them out of their own money.
Or they're loaning them, yeah.
Yeah, or they're loaning them. But do you know what I mean? They've had to have the mindset and the integrity and the knowledge to know that is a key piece to have at that time.
But that stems from what you were saying before. You see his runway shows and you see the front row, and there's no emphasis on, oh my God, we've got so and so at our show. It's very high. It's very high. It's very high. It's like ballet dancers, and I mean, even last night it was Sigourney Weaver on the front row, and she looked absolutely chic in some, and I think it was a leather archive piece. But it's a very limited amount of people that he lets. It's not celebrities. It's not influencers, which I guess adds to the desire for the brand, because these people want to know why they're not invited. They want to know why they haven't been sent these pieces. So. I think from that angle. Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know what you're going to say.
But I think almost in a way, this whole influencer trend and inviting anyone and everyone it almost not puts down a brand, but it changes people's perception.
Yeah.
You know, we see at the Prada show just recently, they had that TikTok.
That TikTok,
girl.
yeah, Charlie's.
That was everywhere.
It's
That was
just
awful. Nobody seemed to like it.
It was horrendous.
It's really cringy.
It was nobody liked it.
yeah, no, and I understand, you know, brands are really heavily trying to stay as relevant as possible, or reach the biggest market as possible, like that they possibly can.
Yeah.
But I think certain times, and I'm not sure if this will sound snobby or anything, but it's just like fashion could just stick to fashion rather than trying to be what is everything. Like, do what you do best.
Kind of like,
Yeah.
And
don't need it.
because, sorry, what little kid that's watching some girl do this on TikTok is going to then go see that she was at Prada?
Do any of you use
buy
TikTok?
Prada?
Like, this is
No,
so
not really.
sidelined. I have no idea, but someone told me the other day that I need TikTok to be relevant, and I thought, I just had to know what the world's coming. I have no idea what to do with TikTok. But,
I'm only on it for research, but I'm not actually on it. I'm like,
yeah, no, it just makes no.
But I can't imagine like Bottega doing something on TikTok. It just wouldn't. It doesn't.
But then
no.
at the same time, you say that JW
I mean, yeah.
did a TikTok to show people who was on the front row.
Also, there's a high fashion like elite that do use TikTok and do use Twitter to like discuss. So I guess there is validity in it. But
Yeah.
it's
How
that
you
fine
use
balance
it.
How you
between
do it.
opening access to everyone and then making sure that the people that are discussing it are the right people. But then again, you shouldn't judge. I mean, this is slightly off topic, but looking at Kim Kardashian, I didn't realize until recently that she has the most amazing archive of designer pieces going back years. Like I didn't realize that she owned the McQueen oyster dress.
Did she own it, or did she?
No,
wear
she
it?
owns it. She has an archive. But I mean, from face value, you would dismiss these celebrities as having no knowledge. But I guess
She has a good team behind her.
your involvement in fashion. I just wanted to talk briefly about the set because we haven't covered that. Did we like the set at all, or
I
not?
saw
Because
that
it was
the
made
statue seemed to be
sustainably.
They're moving, yeah.
But I couldn't really see the detail of that. But I'm guessing that has like some correlation to the like theme of movement
Yeah.
of the show.
Because they said that they put out in their release and all of what they discussed, they said that basically they were, I think it was an interview actually backstage, he said he wasn't going to use elaborate sets. He said he was very aware that every time we do a show, that all of these sets are mass manufactured and they're made of lots of different materials that we then end up throwing away. So for this show, he wanted to just project images onto screens, which can then, the idea is that then you can change it, you can shift it, and the focus should be on the clothes. You should get the feel for the collection through the clothes, not necessarily the environment.
It's really understated and quite beautiful.
Do you think that worked, or do you think it? Because personally, I think it looks a bit naff when seeing a projected column on a screen. I think it looks a bit cheap. So, what do you?
What I liked was before when everyone's sitting down, it looked almost clinical, like there was nothing
Yeah.
projected, and I quite liked that it went from this clinical white, almost bluish hue to this suddenly like old school, Renaissance-y columns. I quite like that
Yeah.
juxtaposition.
Yeah, I
It's
think
almost
it
like a
works.
comment on like clinical and modern, kind of mirroring parts of the collection possibly. Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
I thought it looked really interesting. Then suddenly it just became like,
Yeah, that looks quite. Like, I think it would have looked better with just a plain backdrop to it than I don't know, naff projected image. But do you think that a designer needs to create a world within their show? Because obviously we've come to a place where people want to create a moment because they realise everyone's taking pictures on their Instagram, so they want the set to be as good as you would have a set for a shoot or an editorial, essentially. So do you think we're going to see it shifting back to a more pared back, much simpler showcase?
I don't know. You know, being at shows and seeing them in person, obviously, during Fashion Week it gets so difficult because you go to X amount of shows a day, and by the end of it, you can barely remember what you see.
Yeah.
And so to have a show that is a show as a whole really helps make it stand
Richard
out.
Quinn up. Richard Quinn's show, the set
The Richard-
specifically. Because I was going to say that would be a really good comparison between the two.
Because they had the same opening
Because,
doors.
but also Richard Quinn was very elaborate. There was a lot. There were florals. It was made into a doll's house. And I mean, I have
And they
no
had that
idea where.
singer.
Yeah, I have no idea where he's getting all the money from because he's still a very small designer.
from the Queen.
From the
God save the Queen.
from the Queen. But I mean, that was a That was one of. This is the show that I think everyone has been talking about.
Yeah.
So you compare that to the very simple set at Bottega. Do you think do you think that we need to create a world in order for people to talk about it? Because everyone talked about this show until I was pretty much sick and tired of hearing about it.
I don't think it's people are talking about that show because of the set, but I do think it adds to the
Yeah, because it creates
It's such a brand.
Yeah.
Because, the florals, somehow he's really, season after season, keeping it brand new.
Yeah.
Yes.
You'd see the first collection and be like, you'd think, where's he going to go with this? Like, we've seen this rose print, like, how's it going to be different?
Yeah.
But,
But there was a whole
season.
environment there. Do you think that worked? Because obviously, like I said, everyone was talking about it. So do you think that perhaps Bottega would be more talked about if they'd have created a full environment? Obviously, doesn't fit in with where they were going sustainably. And how do you think they could have done it in a more considerate manner? Because instead of doing this, I suppose, screen projection, do you think there's any other way they could have done it? Instead of making all of these?
I guess probably the most sustainable way to do set design is see this, you go to somewhere that looks like this.
Yeah,
that's
right. I was
Creating
going to
something that
say,
emulates it.
instead of building it inside somewhere, actually go to the place that
Seems
it's
strange because there are buildings that
Yeah.
literally around the corner that they definitely could have.
Milan is full of little treasures.
Although I think most of them it's to do with licensing. I actually think because it's I can't remember the shoot with Vogue and J-Lo. She's the only person that's been able to get, I think, a photograph there. They did an editorial. It was in this Greek, I can't remember what it's called, but basically their licensing means that they're not allowed to shoot there anymore because it's a historical building. So a lot of buildings are not necessarily available for loan for this sort of thing because the government who owns those buildings sees it as cheapening the architecture, sees it as cheapening the, I suppose, tourist value. Do you know what I mean? From the historic value of these buildings.
It's definitely intentional that they've done it. They've recreated this set. I think there's definitely purpose behind that with this show. So they could have done it outside if they wanted to, but there's a reason they didn't.
The lighting would have been better if they'd have done it, so I would have been able to see most of the clothes.
I quite like the lighting though, the strip straight down the runway.
Yeah.
Not to the old days where it's like, that's all you need to see.
Do you not think it gets a bit lost? Because I don't know whether you were discussing it. I think it was Andrew Rose yesterday that discussed the Versace show and said the black on black, you can't see anything. So this is very dark, and a lot of these clothes are very they're grey, they're dark. Do you lose a lot of the detail?
I think it's always going to be hard when you're capturing it
Like that, I can barely
like
see
that.
them.
You can barely see, but I would say I've been at shows where it has been quite dark, but you can see when you're there.
Yes.
So it's obviously really hard taking it afterwards because you don't want to overexpose one image to.
So it's almost creating an
underexpose
exclusive
another.
environment for the people that are viewing it then and there.
Right.
But is that not a show in general? Like,
Yeah, that's what we want when we go to a show. You want something you're not going to be able to see on a screen. Interesting. I don't know, personally I thought it would have been, if they were going to do this, it would have been nicer if they did it on projections or VR or augmented reality. I thought that would have been a much more interesting take on
for the set.
The actual, for the sets,
It's sustainable in that it doesn't produce anything which is going to go to landfill, and it's also a more modern take. Think of the CSM show with like a year or so ago where the front row all wore glasses and then they could see things floating. Imagine if you created a set using VR, that would be a much more interesting.
They tried to do that again this season, didn't they? But
Oh, what with the Adoa thing?
the
the
but
5G.
it just didn't work quite as well.
No, a lot of people weren't on board with that either because 5G was a sponsor and obviously they had to put up a mast in CSM and that's very controversial because it's really bad for all of our health. Say no more. But no, was there anything that stuck out that you wanted to mention or in terms of the collection or in terms of Bottega or Daniel Lee in general? Do you think that where he's going, do you think there's more pressure next season as well? Because there was a lot of pressure this season in terms of producing a collection which was amazing because obviously he'd won these 4 awards and this is essentially his first major output. Since winning those 4 awards, do you think it's justifiable? Do you think that like looking at this collection you can see, oh yeah, that's a guy that's won more awards than any other designer?
I think you can see that quite clearly. Like I said before, it's a shame that the fringing was absolutely everywhere because otherwise this would have been standout and been really nice. It's also really interesting that when we see the sunglasses, that's really not a Bottega shape. That's, it's very much like an ode to streetwear. Like that's the people who are going to be wearing those sunglasses. So you see those fluoro ones just there.
I thought that was one of my favourite parts.
Which was really interesting because then I thought a lot of it, especially the men's, is such like it's got that that sort of like streetwear look to it, but still staying true to like the tailoring and the craft, and which I think a lot of streetwear loses. Virgil loses his ability to create a nice suit because he's so focused on creating things that will generate hype.
Yes.
Whereas I think Daniel Lee here has managed to create something that, you know, we're going to see every influencer waiting outside the show trying to get their picture taken wearing those because they're great and they're really nice and they're current. But he's paired it with this suit jacket that's cropped, that's with the fluo, which, you know, I kind of thought we were overseeing fluo, but it's back again.
It does look, I must admit, it does look really, really nice.
It's called Kiwi, which I quite like.
Like I said, off stage, it's Celine with a pop of Versace. You know what I mean? So, where do you think the brand will go, though, now?
I think Daniel Lee will be snapped up for something bigger.
Oh my gosh.
Do you think that will be the death of Bottega? Or do you think, as in, like, it will...
No, I think he's definitely put Bottega in a standing where people are paying attention to it, and so therefore they will continue to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. This is slightly, I mean, this is, I was hoping that I could round off, but there was one thing I wanted to mention. As we go into the future, and we are moving into a world which is much more conscious, where do you think the leather goods industry will be? Because we talked off air about leather alternatives, and there isn't really a sustainable alternative to leather. Because if you use pleather or PVC or even Pinatex, you've got a level of plastic in it or in the coating of it. So do you think that the leather industry has a stable place in the world of fashion as it is, or do you think people like fur, companies are going to start banning the use of leather? I know that sounds ridiculous because leather is in pretty much every collection, but we're going into this space we're in at the moment is we're having a lot of fast flux in terms of how we work. So do you think people will start to ban leather?
I think we might, with Bottega, I think it's such a leather-heavy brand, like we associate it with leather. I think they might start introducing more vegan products.
Yeah.
I'm hoping. But that's not necessarily a solution, is it, really? I don't know, it's tricky.
It's hard.
I think, you know, you saying about fur and it being banned is... Unfortunately, we've seen this with fur before, where everyone's like,
oh yeah, and it goes
and like the trend is to hate fur, and then it comes back, and you know, maybe eventually that will happen with leather. Like, you see Docs are really at the forefront of creating like their vegan Docs.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's like
it's not necessarily
great because it comes with that added plastic and everything. So I don't know. I think that's a long way off for. People to start considering not to use leather. I think it's still such a staple, like you say, for every collection, you see leather. I think maybe what would benefit is that certain brands who don't know what they're doing with leather just stop.
Yeah.
Whereas Bottega is one, just like Loewe, because it is so integral to their identity. They're sort of at the forefront, and I think they can continue with it.
And when you want good leather goods, you would probably go to a Bottega or a Loewe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also leather is such it's an ingredient, not ingredient, it's a material that you can use for a long time. It lasts a long time.
That's true. Yeah.
So like when I have leather jackets, I've had them for like 10 years.
We would hope that people use it for a long time.
That's what exactly.
That is the idea.
That is.
Yeah, it's true. But it lends itself more to longevity than, say, cotton or something that you can just chuck out.
But then that being said, do these woven leather bags lend themselves to longevity at all? They feel fragile.
Yeah, that's
They're actually quite strong. I read into this. They're double bonded. So basically the leather is, it's exactly the same as it is on the outside, on the inside. So that gives it the luxe feel. And how they're made. So they're bonded. I mean, that's not sustainable because obviously you're using a toxic glue to bond the leathers, but and then it's stitched over the top before it's woven together. So it's actually quite a long process. And in order to learn how to make these woven bags, apparently it can take up to 15 years in education to learn how to make some of their classic pieces really well. So that's why they have obviously an education program for them. But no, the only reason I asked about that vegan leather thing is obviously because with fur, we've now got technology where they're able to make fur it's not made of plastic, it's grown. It's in test phases at the moment in terms of that. And as a sustainable designer myself, I would like to think that perhaps these brands, for longevity reasons, would consider other options or would consider lab-grown alternatives that don't include toxins or glues or plastic inclusion in their processes, because then that would, in my mind, that would formulate a more forward-thinking brand. And obviously, in terms of aesthetic, you all agree that Bottega will be around for a while, I assume. Like, this isn't a brand going anywhere. So perhaps as we are a very, I hate to use the term woke, but woke and conscious consumer base, then I think that perhaps it would be nice if they considered those sort of elements, do we not?
I think the difficulty with alternatives is that to have an alternative means there's always a market for the original. And so, like, faux fur exists because people want, like, fur. And so, and then, you know, there was that whole scandal where high streets were selling faux fur.
Oh yeah, that was real, and which is awful, but...
Which, you know, I think that's, like, quite a difficult line where it's like... I mean, I'm not really sure.
I understand what you mean. It was very well said, though, that, like, yeah, where you are, because we're always going to have it, but I think the industry needs to change, because I talked to a leather manufacturer, and basically you can't trace necessarily the hides, and that takes a long time. But this is a brand that they take a long time to make these pieces, so perhaps including that traceability level, so you're able to trace exactly where the hide comes from, to the specific cow, to the specific farm. That might be a way of working in a more, not necessarily sustainable, not necessarily environmentally friendly way of working, but it's a more manageable way of working that process of leather manufacture, because then you can at least know exactly where those pieces are from. Yeah, that kind of covers what I wanted. Is there anything you all wanted to touch on or mention, or in terms of this collection, or Bottega in general, or Daniel Lee?
That sequin look stands out for me because, like, where does she come from?
As in the girl?
No, sorry. As in the dress. It seems
really out of place.
Yeah, all the sequin stuff.
Yeah, I actually agree with that, yeah.
It's not Bottega.
No.
It's quite unusual.
And it's nothing that special.
Yeah, I agree.
I actually really didn't think it added, like, anything. It could have done without
the red one's nice because of the colour. With the pink boot. I mean, I love a red and pink situation. But the beige one, I was just a bit...
Yeah, I agree. I like the sequin denim, though. I thought that was kind of nice. But that's about it.
I imagine that the sequin looks are maybe thrown in there a bit more last minute, just because it would make sense next season to expand into evening wear.
But it's like these looks that are also very different, but we can see come from, you know, those ruched slips.
Yeah, you can see
that's where that's come from. But this, for me, the sequin looks just popped up. And they were like, look, I'm here. But didn't really do anything.
But why are you there?
But going back, that's why I was a bit confused about certain pieces, and I think perhaps if you separate the look out, it might look better as separates, and when you loan pieces out, I guess it will be more appropriate. But I think perhaps forward thinking, it might just be you might have just chucked them in there for the sake of expanding an evening wear selection next season, so that you've got more long length, more, like, I suppose, sequin inclusion.
More, you know, like not runway, red carpet.
Yeah.
That's what I think he sort of will eventually.
Working with companies like Swarovski and people like that, so maybe that makes more sense. So in retrospect, when we look at next season, we might look back and be like, oh, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it just seems a little bit random.
I mean, it's also autumn winter, so there is that, like, Christmas dressy thing they need to consider as well. But
yeah, because by the time it goes on sale, it'll be around about the time.
Yeah, but do you think brands as a whole consider that? I think there's a lot of brands will do, like, not a lot, but I think if a brand is going to do that, they'll do a Christmas thing, like a drop or a specialist diffusion thing.
There's nothing in the world, but I can understand why a brand would do it.
Yeah, but, like, I don't see this crying out like,
it isn't.
Girls, I'm ready for the Christmas party.
Why not?
I wish. I'd wear that to my Christmas party, but
I wish I could.
You know, I don't think that's the thought behind it.
No, it's not.
Cool. I think that pretty much covers, unless there's anything you want to scream out, I think that pretty much covers Bottega. So do we, overall, are we on board with this, or do we think it's a hit or a miss?
I'm there for it. Menswear's great.
So we're for it?
We're for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll pass this. I'll go with the majority this time. I'll go with the majority. Right. Thank you to all of our panellists, and thank you for watching. For more extensive Fashion Week coverage, make sure to check out SHOWstudio.com. And if you're watching via SHOWstudio's YouTube page, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much.